The interstellar research vessel Unity's Dawn floated quietly in the darkness of space. Its metal surface reflected the light from distant stars as it waited for the most important meeting in human history. Dr. Kim Hanna stood on the bridge, checking her scientific equipment one last time. Today, humans would meet the Vorthok Empire for the first time. Captain Lee Jun-ho watched his crew of 23 people prepare for the meeting. These were Earth's best diplomats and scientists, chosen carefully for this moment. The Vorthok had found human radio signals and agreed to meet them. They said they wanted to test if humans were good enough to join other space civilizations. Everyone ready? Captain Lee asked his team. The crew nodded, though some looked nervous. They all knew what they had heard about the Vorthok Empire. These aliens had conquered over 300 different species across the galaxy. Suddenly, space in front of them began to shimmer and twist. A massive alien ship appeared out of nowhere. The Bone Crusher was enormous, at least 10 times bigger than the human vessel. Its dark metal hull was covered with sharp spikes and strange decorations that looked like trophies taken from defeated enemies. Park Min-ho, the head diplomat, adjusted his formal clothes and took a deep breath. "Remember what we learned," he whispered to the others. "The Vorthok respects strength but hate weakness. Stay calm no matter what happens." The two ships connected with a loud clank. Air hissed as the airlocks sealed together. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors as the alien visitors boarded the human ship. The crew gathered in the main conference room, waiting. The doors slid open with a soft whoosh. The Vorthok delegation entered, and immediately the humans understood why so many species feared them. These creatures were nearly 3 meters tall, towering over even the tallest humans. Their skin was covered in deep red scales that looked like armor. Their eyes glowed with an eerie light, like stars about to die. The leader wore actual armor made from bones. White skulls and rib cages from unknown creatures decorated his chest and shoulders. When he moved, the bone armor clicked and rattled ominously. Behind him, 3 other Vorthok warriors stood in formation, their clawed hands resting on strange weapons. "I am War Commander Thakmer," the leader spoke through a mechanical translator attached to his throat. His voice was deep and rough, like grinding stone. "You are the humans we have heard about. Small creatures from a small world." Captain Lee stepped forward politely. "Welcome aboard our ship, War Commander. We are honored to meet representatives of the great Vorthok Empire." Thakmer's glowing eyes studied the human captain with amusement. "Honor? You do not yet understand what honor means, little human. Today, you will learn why 300 species kneel before the Vorthok." The War Commander raised his clawed hands above his head. Immediately, something changed in the air. It became thick and heavy, like breathing underwater. A terrible smell filled the room, chemicals that made every human instinct scream in terror. But this was not just a bad smell. Something invisible attacked the humans' minds directly. Waves of pure fear crashed into their thoughts, like a tsunami of nightmares. Images of death and destruction flooded their brains. They saw their families dying, their planet burning, their entire species being wiped out. One by one, the humans collapsed. Captain Lee fell to his knees, his whole body shaking uncontrollably. His face turned pale, and sweat poured down his forehead. Diplomat Park grabbed his chest and started breathing very fast, gasping for air like a drowning man. The scientists and crew members writhed on the floor. Some cried out in terror. Others curled up in balls, trying to hide from the invisible. Horror attacking their minds. The fear was so strong it bypassed all logical thinking and hit them at the most basic animal level. All except one person, Dr. Kim. Hannah remained standing exactly where she was. She held her electronic tablet calmly in her hands, watching the readings on her scientific instruments, while her colleagues suffered around her. She simply pushed her glasses up her nose and continued taking notes. War Commander Thakmer stared at her in complete confusion. His secondary commander, Sektar, clicked his sharp claws together nervously. In all their centuries of conquest, no living creature had ever resisted Vorthok fear-inducement techniques. Fascinating, Hannah said quietly, studying the numbers on her tablet screen. The chemical concentration is about 40 times stronger than what would paralyze most Earth mammals, and this psychic attack component, very interesting how it targets specific neural pathways in the brain. She looked up at the towering alien warrior with the same expression a scientist might use when examining an interesting insect. There was no fear in her eyes, no terror, no panic, just curiosity. Thakmar felt something he had not experienced in centuries: uncertainty. His intimidation tactics had broken the minds of gods and demons. They had shattered entire civilizations without firing a single weapon. But this small human female stood there taking scientific measurements as if nothing was happening. The war commander stepped closer to her, his massive form casting a dark shadow over her small body. His confusion was quickly turning into anger. How dare this tiny creature resist the power of the Vorthok Empire? You, ... he growled, his voice full of menace. War Commander Thakmar stood over Dr. Kim Hannah like a giant shadow. His anger grew stronger with each passing second. For hundreds of years, no living creature had ever resisted the fear weapons of the Vorthok Empire. His people had built their entire civilization on making others afraid, and now, this tiny human woman was completely ignoring his most powerful attacks. You dare to mock the mighty Vorthok, he roared, his voice shaking the walls of the conference room. The war commander decided to use his strongest weapon. He closed his glowing eyes and focused all his mental power on the human scientist. Invisible waves of pure terror shot from his mind directly into hers. The psychic attack was devastating. Hannah's mind was flooded with horrible visions. She saw entire planets burning in space, millions of people screaming as their cities were destroyed. She watched her own species being completely wiped out, every human dying in terrible pain. These were not just pictures, they felt completely real, as if she was actually watching her world end. This kind of mental assault had destroyed the sanity of entire alien races. Kings and emperors had become babbling madmen after experiencing just a fraction of what Thakmar was now pouring into Hannah's brain. Gods from ancient civilizations had begged for death rather than endure such visions. Hannah blinked once, then she made another note on her tablet. Very interesting, she said in the same calm voice a teacher might use in a classroom. The neural impact focuses on the amygdala and hypothalamus regions of the brain. That's a very smart design for triggering basic fear responses in most species. Thakmar felt his two hearts beating much faster than normal. This was impossible. What he had just done should have turned her mind into broken pieces. He looked around the room at the other humans, who were still lying on the floor. Some were crying. Others had fainted completely from the shock of his earlier, weaker attacks. But this woman continued to study him like he was some kind of laboratory experiment. This cannot be, Sektar whispered to his commander. The secondary Vorthok warrior took several steps backward, his claws shaking slightly. Sir, no being in the galaxy can resist that level of psychic assault. Thakmar's scales rippled with confusion and growing fear. He had used these same mental weapons to break creatures that could destroy stars with their bare hands. He had made demons weep and gods surrender. But this small human female just stood there taking scientific measurements. Human, the war commander's voice became very quiet and dangerous. Why aren't you scared? For the first time since the aliens had boarded their ship, Dr. Kim Hannah looked directly into Thakmar's glowing eyes. What he saw there made his ancient warrior instincts scream warnings at him. Her eyes held no fear at all, but they also held no anger or defiance. Instead, there was something much more disturbing, a cold, calculating calmness that seemed to see right through him. Because I've seen what humans do when we're actually afraid, she replied in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. And you really don't want that to happen. The temperature in the room seemed to drop suddenly. Even through his mechanical translator, Thakmer could hear something in her tone that made every survival instinct he had developed over centuries of warfare start screaming. This was not the voice of someone trying to sound brave. This was not someone bluffing or pretending to be strong. This was the voice of someone who had seen something so terrible that nothing else could ever frighten them again. Sektar felt his legs moving backward without his permission. "War Commander," he said nervously, "perhaps we should return to our ship and discuss this situation with the fleet." "Silence," Thakmer shouted, but for the first time in his long life, his own voice carried a note of uncertainty. He stared at the human woman, trying to understand what she meant. "Explain yourself, human creature. What could possibly terrify a species that has conquered the galaxy through fear itself?" Around them, the other humans were slowly beginning to recover from the psychic attacks. Captain Lee was still on his knees, but he was no longer shaking as badly. Diplomat Park was sitting up, wiping sweat from his face. The scientists were helping each other stand up, though they all looked pale and exhausted, but none of them looked surprised by Hannah's behavior. They watched her with something that looked almost like respect, as if they had expected her to resist the aliens' fear weapons. Dr. Kim Hannah calmly set her tablet down on the conference table. She folded her hands in front of her and looked up at the towering alien warrior who could have crushed her with one hand. "Would you like me to show you our history, War Commander?" she asked in the same polite tone someone might use to offer tea to a guest. "Would you like to see the real reason why your terror tactics feel like a gentle spring breeze to someone who comes from Earth?" Thakmer felt something he had not experienced in over 300 years of conquest. For the first time since he was a young warrior, he was beginning to feel afraid. Dr. Kim Hannah touched a button on her tablet, and suddenly, the conference room filled with moving pictures that appeared in the air like magic. The holographic display showed scenes that made even the battle-hardened Vorthok warriors take steps backward in shock. War Commander Thakmer watched as images of human warfare appeared before his eyes. But these were not clean battles between different species fighting with advanced technology. These were raw, brutal fights between humans and other humans, members of the same species tearing each other apart. "This is called the Battle of the Somme," Hannah explained in the same calm voice she might use to describe the weather. The display showed endless rows of muddy trenches stretching as far as the eye could see. The trenches were filled with mud, blood, and pieces of dead bodies. In just one day, we killed 60,000 of our own people. For 4 months, humans crawled through fields covered with corpses, breathing poisonous gas, watching their friends die in terrible pain. And they never stopped fighting. Thakmer felt his red scales moving in waves across his body, a sign of deep unease among his people. The Vorthok Empire conquered other species through quick attacks and fear tactics. They had never seen this kind of long, grinding warfare where creatures willingly suffered for months just to kill their own kind. But that was just one battle, Hannah continued, touching her tablet again. The display changed to show a city full of normal buildings and people going about their daily lives. Then there was a bright flash of light, brighter than a star. "This is Hiroshima," she said, as the images showed the city completely destroyed in seconds. Where buildings and people had been, there was nothing but empty space and strange shadows burned into the ground. We created weapons that turned the basic building blocks of matter into pure destruction. We used these weapons on our own cities, turning children into vapor while they slept in their beds. Sektar made nervous clicking sounds with his claws. But surely this was war between different types of humans, different subspecies that were natural enemies. Hannah looked at him with those calm, analytical eyes. "No," she said simply. "Same species, same planet, same DNA. We did this to ourselves for thousands of years. We turned psychological warfare into a perfect science. We made fear into an art form that we practiced on our own people." The display changed again, and now it showed things that made even Thakmer, who had conquered 300 worlds, feel sick to his stomach. Medieval torture devices designed to cause maximum pain while keeping the victim alive as long as possible. Machines built specifically to break human minds. Camps where humans performed medical experiments on other humans just to see what would happen. You see, War Commander, Hannah explained as calmly as if she was discussing the weather, what you call fear tactics are things that human children learn about in their history classes at school. We study our own ability to create horror the same way other species study mathematics or science. We have written books documenting every possible way to break a mind, destroy a spirit, or crush a soul. We have already done all of these things to ourselves. The images kept changing. Humans killing other humans in ways that showed incredible creativity in causing suffering. Wars that lasted for decades, where both sides forgot what they were fighting about, but continued killing anyway. Political systems designed specifically to make people afraid of their own neighbors and family members. War Commander Thakmar found his feet moving backward without his permission. In all his centuries of conquest, the Vorthok Empire had never encountered anything like this. They had met species that were strong, species that were smart, species that had powerful weapons, but they had never met a species that had turned trauma and suffering into tools, and then used those tools on themselves for entertainment. The important difference, Hannah continued, is that we learned from all of this. We looked at what we were capable of doing, and decided to become something better, but we never forgot the lessons. Every human alive today carries the genetic memory of surviving the worst possible enemy, other humans. She paused and looked directly into Thakmar's glowing eyes. Around the room, the other humans were standing up and watching. They did not look proud of the images Hannah was showing, but they did not look ashamed either. They looked like people who had accepted a difficult truth about themselves. Your fear techniques work very well on species that have never conquered fear itself, Hannah said quietly. You can frighten creatures who have never seen real horror. But we are not brave, War Commander. We are not fearless heroes from some story. She gestured at the holographic images still floating in the air around them. We are just ... experienced. We have already seen everything you could possibly show us. We have already lived through every nightmare you could create. And we survived it all by learning to be stronger than our own darkness. Thakmar realized that his hands were shaking. For the first time in 3 centuries of warfare, he was beginning to understand that he might have made a terrible mistake. Admiral Cho Daeun was sitting in his command chair on the human battleship. Earth's memory, when the emergency message arrived. The communication screen lit up with Dr. Kim Hannah's face, and she quickly explained what was happening aboard the Unity's Dawn. Admiral, she said calmly, the Vorthok are testing our fear responses. I think they're about to call for military support. You should prepare for the worst. As if her words had magic power, space around the small research vessel suddenly filled with massive alien warships. 12 Vorthok battlecruisers dropped out of hyperspace like giant metal monsters. Each ship was 3 times larger than the biggest human vessel, covered in weapon systems that glowed with deadly energy. Lieutenant Osun Min turned from his sensor station with worry in his voice. Sir, War Commander Thakmar is sending us a message. He's demanding that all humans surrender immediately. He says we are a problematic species that needs to be ... corrected. Admiral Cho looked at the alien ship surrounding the tiny human research vessel. Then he smiled, but it was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment his entire military career. After receiving Dr. Hannah's full report about the Vorthok fear tactics, he had already made his decision. The aliens wanted to test human responses to terror. Then they would get a complete demonstration of what humans had learned about psychological warfare over thousands of years of practice. Send a message to all ships in the fleet, Admiral Cho ordered. Authorization code 77 Alpha. Begin Protocol 7 immediately. Protocol 7 was humanity's most secret military doctrine. It had been developed by studying every form of psychological warfare that humans had ever used on each other. Scientists and military experts had spent decades perfecting methods of mental attack that could break the will of any enemy without firing a single physical weapon. Signal all vessels, the Admiral continued. Decloak the entire fleet. Begin the Nightmare Protocol. Around the Vorthok ships, empty space suddenly began to twist and change. Like magic, 50 human warships appeared out of nowhere. They had been hiding using advanced stealth technology, waiting for exactly this moment. But these were not normal military ships designed just for fighting battles. These vessels had been specially built by a species that understood fear better than any other race in the galaxy. They were platforms designed for psychological warfare, floating laboratories of terror created by beings who had turned mental suffering into an exact science. The human fleet did not fire their weapons. Instead, they began broadcasting something much more dangerous. Sound filled every Vorthok communication channel. It was unlike anything the aliens had ever heard before. Human laughter mixed with screams from ancient battlefields, whispers from people whose minds had been broken by war, the singing voices of children who had seen too much death and destruction. It was the sound of a species that had looked into the deepest darkness imaginable and learned to dance with it. But the sounds were just the beginning. Holographic projections suddenly surrounded all 12 Vorthok ships. The aliens found themselves staring at human art created by minds that had been pushed beyond sanity. Paintings and sculptures that showed the beauty hidden inside madness. Mathematical equations that described exactly how to destroy hope and rebuild it as something stronger. Most disturbing of all were the images of human faces. These were not the faces of monsters or evil creatures. They were ordinary people, teachers, doctors, parents, children, but they were all smiling while doing things that no sane mind should be able to imagine. They looked happy while creating horrors that made Vorthok conquest methods seem gentle by comparison. On the Vorthok flagship Bone Crusher, crew members began backing away from their control stations. These experienced warriors had conquered hundreds of worlds. They understood simple fears like death or physical pain. Those were clean, honest terrors that made sense. But what the humans were showing them was something far worse. It was the slow, creeping realization that they were facing a species that had already experienced every possible nightmare and found them boring. War Commander, Sektar's voice shook as he spoke. I request permission to withdraw all ships immediately. This is this is not natural fear. This is something completely different. Around them, Vorthok crew members, who had faced the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, were now hiding under their control panels like frightened children. Some were making soft whimpering sounds. Others had stopped working entirely and just stared at the human projections with empty eyes. Thekmer watched his veteran warriors, beings who had participated in 300 successful conquests, reduced to cowering animals by humanity's psychological weapons. For the first time in his very long life, he finally understood what Dr. Kim Hanna had been trying to tell him. The humans were not showing them weapons of war. They were showing them what came after war was over. What happened when victory and defeat both became meaningless, because the winners had learned to love the darkness they had created instead of being destroyed by it. Thakmar realized with growing horror that humanity had not just survived their own capacity for evil, they had made friends with it. War Commander Thakmar's hands were shaking as he reached for the communication controls on his command chair. Around him, his crew members were hiding in corners of the bridge, their minds unable to understand the terrible things that the humans had just shown them. These were not weapons of war that the aliens could fight against. This was something much worse. It was the truth about what humans really were. Human fleet, he spoke into the communicator, his voice no longer strong and commanding like before. I request that you stop this attack immediately. The moment he finished speaking, everything stopped. The horrible sounds that had been filling every Vorthok communication channel went silent. The frightening holographic images that surrounded their ships disappeared like they had never existed. In the sudden quiet, Admiral Cho Dae-yoon's voice came through the speakers calm and clear. Dr. Kim Hanna asked us to give you a proper demonstration of human nature, War Commander. Are you ready to listen to what we have to say now? Thakmer looked around at his crew. These were experienced warriors who had helped conquer 300 different worlds. But now they looked like scared children, trembling and unable to work their control stations. Then he looked at the 50 human ships surrounding his fleet, vessels that could have easily destroyed every Vorthok vessel, but had chosen instead to show them something far more devastating than any weapon. Yes, he whispered into the communicator. We will listen. On the research ship Unity's Dawn, Dr. Kim Hanna stood in the conference room speaking to both fleets through the communication system. Her human colleagues had recovered from the fear attacks and stood beside her. But none of the humans looked angry or interested in revenge against the aliens who had tried to hurt them. War Commander, you asked me why I was not afraid of your fear weapons, Hanna said in her calm scientist voice. The answer is very simple. We have already faced the worst possible enemy that any species could ever fight ourselves. Every nightmare you could possibly show us, we have already lived through and survived. We do not fear darkness because we learned how to make it work for us instead of against us. Thakmer's voice came through the speakers, so quiet it was almost impossible to hear. Your species. How do you manage to function normally? How do you build cities and families and art after seeing such terrible things? Captain Lee stepped forward to answer. He still looked tired and pale from the earlier psychic attack, but his voice was steady. Because we made a choice, War Commander. We looked at all the horrible things we were capable of doing to each other, and we decided to become something better than that. We use our knowledge of fear not to conquer other people, but to protect them. Dr. Hanna touched her tablet one more time, and the holographic display showed completely different images. Instead of war and destruction, the room filled with pictures of human hospitals where doctors saved lives. Schools where children learned and played together. Art museums full of beautiful paintings and sculptures. Spaceships exploring distant stars, not to conquer them, but to learn about them. We took everything we learned about how to destroy minds and break spirits, Hanna explained, and we used that knowledge to heal people instead. We became like gardeners who plant flowers of hope in soil that was once filled with despair. Admiral Cho's voice carried across both fleets from his battleship. The Vorthok Empire has conquered many worlds by making other species afraid. But you have never met a species that conquered fear itself. We are not offering to make you our slaves, War Commander. We are offering you partnership with beings who understand that real strength does not come from making others afraid. Real strength comes from the wisdom you gain by surviving terrible things. War Commander Thakmer looked at his crew again. They were slowly beginning to work at their stations, but he could see that what they had witnessed had changed them forever. Then he looked at the human ships and thought about the people inside them, beings who had somehow walked through every possible hell and come out not as monsters, but as protectors of others who might face the same darkness. The Vorthok Empire, he said in his most formal voice, wishes to begin negotiations for an alliance with humanity. We realize that we have much to learn from your people. Dr. Kim Hanna smiled, but this time it was not the terrible smile that humans used in psychological warfare. This was the gentle smile of someone who had found reasons to hope, even in the darkest places imaginable. Then let's start by trying to understand each other, War Commander. After all, the best way to defeat monsters is not to become a monster yourself. The best way is to show them that there is a better way to live. As both fleets powered down their weapon systems, something new began in galactic history. This was the day when the conquerors learned that the most frightening thing in the universe was not someone who could break you. The most frightening thing was someone who had been completely broken and then chose to heal and help others, instead of spreading more pain.